He called me a gray mouse. He said I was just furniture in his house. But today, he is ruined, bankrupt, alone. And I am the one smiling. He forced my daughter to her knees. He grabbed her by her hair. He screamed that she was disrespecting his noble bloodline. He thought he was untouchable. He didn't know I was watching from the shadows. He wanted a celebration. So, I threw him a dinner party. I invited the banks. I invited the elite. But I didn't serve champagne. I served a dusty medical file from 1978, a file that proved his precious bloodline never existed. He thought he was fighting a helpless old widow. He forgot one thing. Archivists keep the receipts. Watch how I burned his dynasty to the ground. Rain, it drummed against the windshield of the taxi. A relentless rhythmic tapping that matched the anxious thrumming of my own heart. I wasn't supposed to be here. I wasn't supposed to be in the city at all. I was supposed to be 20 miles away, wrapped in a wool blanket on the porch of my cabin, watching the mist roll over the pines. That cabin was my sanctuary, my only escape. It was the one place where the air didn't taste like tension, the one place where I didn't have to walk on eggshells in my own home, but I had forgotten them. My blood pressure pills. A small, stupid mistake. The amber bottle was sitting right there on the hallway dresser, mocking me. I could see it in my mind's eye. I had debated just staying at the cabin without them. I had told myself it was only 2 days. But at my age, you don't gamble with hypertension. Not when your life is already a pressure cooker waiting to explode. So, I came back. The taxi pulled up to the curb. The building looked ominous in the gray twilight. Our apartment was on the 3rd floor. Usually the windows were dark at this hour, or perhaps glowing with the soft, warm light of a single floor lamp. Zadie loved coziness. She loved shadows. But tonight, the windows were blazing. Every light in the living room was on. It was a harsh, white glare. It didn't look like a home. It looked like an operating theater or an interrogation room. I paid the driver and stepped onto the wet pavement. A shiver that had nothing to do with the October wind raced down my spine. My chest felt tight, instinct, that ancient, primal alarm bell that rings when a predator is near the nest. I took the stairs slowly. 1, 2, 3. I reached for my keys, the metal cold and biting against my palm. But I didn't need them. The door was unlocked. The latch hadn't clicked into the groove. It was just resting there, slightly ajar, as if someone had entered in a violent hurry. Or as if someone didn't care who walked in. I pushed the door open. Silence, but not the good kind. Not the peaceful silence of the library archives where I had spent 40 years of my life. This was a heavy silence. Thick, suffocating. It pressed against my eardrums. It smelled of wet wool, expensive cologne, and fear. That cologne? Sandalwood and musk. It made my stomach turn. Cornelius was here. I stepped into the foyer. I didn't call out. I didn't announce myself. Years of walking between the dusty stacks of the county archives had taught me how to move without making a sound. I was invisible. I had spent the last 2 years making myself invisible in my own home, trying to shrink, trying to disappear so I wouldn't trigger his temper. I was the gray mouse. The furniture, the mother-in-law who retreated to the kitchen. I crept down the hallway. The floorboards, usually so treacherous, seemed to conspire with me tonight. They didn't creak then. I heard it. A voice. It wasn't shouting. Shouting would have been better. Shouting is human. This was a low, measured rumble. It sounded like stones grinding together in a deep well. 'Cause you don't understand your place, little girl. Cornelius. But there was something new in his tone. Usually he was pompous, arrogant, dismissive. But this was sadistic. There was a cold, wet pleasure in his voice that froze the blood in my veins. I reached the end of the hallway. The living room opened up to the left. I stayed in the shadows of the china cabinet, hidden by the darkness of the corridor. I leaned forward just an inch, and my world ended. The image burned itself into my retinas instantly. It was a tableau of absolute cruelty, in the center of the room. On the Persian rug my late husband had bought for our 10th anniversary was my daughter. My Zadie, my proud, artistic, beautiful Zadie. She was on her knees. She was wearing a simple house dress. The fabric pulled tight across her shoulders. Her head was forced back at an unnatural, painful angle. And standing over her, looming like a black granite cliff, was Cornelius Thorne. He wasn't just standing there. His hand, that massive, heavy hand adorned with a gold signet ring, was buried in her thick, dark hair. He had twisted her braids around his fist. He was pulling upward, forcing her to look at the ceiling, exposing her throat. Her face, oh God, her face thought it was a mask of frozen agony. Tears were streaming down her cheeks, leaving shiny tracks in the harsh overhead light. Her mouth was open in a silent gasp, but she wasn't making a sound. She was terrified to make a sound. "Repeat it," Cornelius said softly. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. I could see the veins throbbing in his thick neck. "Repeat what I said." I looked toward the window. There was a man standing there. Elroy. My son-in-law. Zadie's husband. He was standing with his back to them. He was staring out into the dark street. His hands were clasped behind his back, gripping his wrists so tightly that his knuckles were white. He was trembling. A fine, continuous vibration ran through his entire body. He knew. He knew his wife was on her knees behind him. He knew his father had his fist in her hair. And he did nothing. He was a statue carved from cowardice. "I was wrong," Zadie whispered. Her voice was broken. A jagged shard of sound. Cornelius yanked her hair harder. Her head jerked back. A whimper escaped her lips, a small animal sound of pain that tore through my heart like a bullet. "Louder," Cornelius hissed. "And with respect. You are not speaking to a grocer. You are speaking to the head of this family. I was wrong." Zadie sobbed, her voice cracking. "Please." "You're hurting me." "Pain is a teacher," Cornelius replied. He didn't let go. He twisted his grip, tightening the tension on her scalp. "Now, tell me what I am going to teach you." Zadie squeezed her eyes shut. Fresh tears squeezed out. "You are going to teach me how a real woman acts." He fed the line to her, his voice dripping with venom. "How a real woman acts." "In her husband's house?" "In her husband's house," she repeated, barely a whisper. "Since your own mother didn't bother to explain these simple truths to you?" The mention of me hit me like a physical blow. He was blaming me. He was torturing her, humiliating her, breaking her spirit, and using my name to do it. In that second, the Althea standing in the hallway died. The Althea who believed in keeping the peace died. The Althea who thought that if she just stayed quiet, just stayed out of the way, things would get better. She withered away and turned to dust. The fear didn't leave. But it changed. It calcified. It turned into something cold and hard and sharp, like a diamond. I looked at him. I looked at the way his expensive suit jacket strained across his shoulders. I looked at the shine of his shoes. I looked at the absolute unchecked power he felt in this moment. He thought he was a king disciplining a servant. He thought this apartment was his kingdom. He had no idea there was a witness in the shadows. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rush into the room and claw his eyes out. I wanted to smash a vase over his head, but I stopped myself. I looked at his size. 250 pounds of aggressive male. I looked at my own hands, veined, arthritic, trembling. If I ran in there screaming, he would just push me aside. He would call me hysterical. He would spin the narrative. He would say I was a crazy old woman interrupting a family discussion. He would gaslight Elroy. He would terrify Zadie into silence. No, archivists don't scream. Archivists don't throw tantrums. Archivists document. Archivists preserve the truth so that history cannot be rewritten by the victors. My hand moved to my pocket, slowly, millimeter by millimeter. I felt the cool, smooth glass of my smartphone screen. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. I slid the phone out. I pressed the button on the side. The camera opened. I raised it. My hand, which had been shaking moments ago, was suddenly steady. Steady as a rock. I framed the shot. The tyrant. The victim. The coward in the corner. Good, Cornelius purred. He leaned closer to her ear. You should thank us, Sadie. Thank us for accepting someone of your ... background into the Thorne bloodline. I tapped the red circle ... recording ... every pixel. Every word. Every second of his cruelty was being burned into the digital memory. He was digging his own grave with his mouth. Then he didn't even know I was holding the shovel. I watched through the screen. I watched him finally release her hair, shoving her head forward as he let go. Zadie collapsed onto her hands, gasping for air. Save. I tapped the screen. The video saved to the cloud. It was done. I had the weapon. Now I had to enter the war. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the smell of my own home he had contaminated. I turned back to the front door. I grabbed the handle. I needed to catch them. But not as the witness. I needed to catch them as the interruption. I pulled the door open wide and then, with every ounce of strength in my body, slammed it shut. The door slam echoed. It rang through the apartment like a gunshot. A sharp, violent crack that severed the tension in the living room, then silence. But this was a different kind of silence. It was the frantic, terrified silence of rats scurrying into the dark when the kitchen light flicks on. I heard a shuffle, a gasp, the sound of fabric rustling. I took a breath. I filled my lungs with air that tasted of dust and old wax. I needed to be convincing. I needed to be the harmless, forgetful grandmother. I needed to be the gray mouse, Sadie. Elroy, I called out. My voice was bright. Too bright. It sounded brittle to my own ears, but I forced a laugh. Can you believe it? I forgot my medicine. My head is splitting. I threw my coat onto the rack. I made noise. I shuffled my slippers. I wanted them to have those precious few seconds to compose themselves. I needed Cornelius to think he was safe. I walked into the living room. The scene had changed. It was like a magic trick. A dark, twisted magic trick. Zadie was no longer on her knees. She was standing by the window, her back to me. Her shoulders were hunched, vibrating with suppressed sobs. She was wiping her face frantically with her sleeve. Elroy was still in the corner. He hadn't moved. He was staring at his shoes as if they were the most interesting things in the world. And Cornelius. He was standing by the fireplace. He was adjusting his cuffs. A flicker of gold caught the light. His cufflinks. Solid gold. Embossed with the family crest. A lion roaring. He wasn't out of breath. He wasn't flushed. He looked perfectly, terrifyingly calm. He looked like a man who had just finished a pleasant business meeting. Not a man who had been dragging a woman by her hair 10 seconds ago. He turned to me. A smile spread across his face. It was a shark's smile. Dead in the eyes. All teeth. Ah, Ms. Althea, he boomed. His voice was rich. Baritone, it vibrated in the floorboards. We were just discussing family traditions with the young folks. He gestured vaguely toward Zadie. Z-A-D-I-E ... Well, you know her. She can be a bit ... emotional, too much artistic temperament. He chuckled. A dry, rasping sound. Nerves, he added, dismissing my daughter's pain with a wave of his heavy hand. It's all just nerves. I looked at Zadie. She flinched at his voice. She looked like a broken doll that had been hastily glued back together. I looked back at Cornelius. I forced my own lips to curve upward. I forced my shoulders to slump. I rubbed my temples feebly. Oh, Cornelius, I sighed. Getting old is no joy. My pressure. I didn't even hear you come in. I sank into my armchair. The springs creaked. I made myself look small. I made myself look tired. He watched me. His eyes were small, dark beads, beady eyes that calculated everything. He was assessing me. Was I a threat? Was I a witness? He saw the slump of my shoulders. He saw the trembling hand I raised to my forehead. He relaxed. he didn't see a threat. He saw a foolish old woman concerned with her pills. To a man like Cornelius Thorne, women came in two varieties: those he could use, and those he could ignore. I had just voluntarily stepped into the second category. "You should rest, Althea," he said. The tone was condescending, patronizing, like he was speaking to a slow child. "I won't tire you out. I have a big day tomorrow." He checked his watch. A heavy gold Rolex. It probably cost more than Elroy made in a year. "The committee," he announced, puffing out his chest. "We are preparing for the city's centennial jubilee. You understand? The Thorne line. We have always been at the center of this region's history." He began to walk toward the door. He moved with the heavy, inevitable momentum of a tank. He owned the space. He walked through my living room as if he held the deed to the building. As he passed Elroy, he stopped. He didn't look at his son. He just reached out and tapped him on the shoulder. 2 hard, heavy taps. "Remember what we discussed, Elroy?" he said softly. The menace was back, hidden under the velvet tone, but sharp as a razor. "Investments. The future. Don't disappoint me." Elroy shrank. He physically collapsed into himself. "Yes, father," he whispered. Cornelius nodded. He looked satisfied. He looked like a king who had just inspected his troops and found them sufficiently terrified. He reached the hallway. He put on his coat. Cashmere black. It smelled of damp wool and cold air. Then he stopped. He turned back to me. He looked around my hallway. He wrinkled his nose, a distinct expression of disgust. "By the way, Ms. Althea," he said, "since we are ... family." He paused. He pulled a folded sheet of paper from his pocket. "Next week. Tuesday. Photographers are coming." I froze. "Photographers? For the campaign brochure?" he said impatiently. "I need the ambiance. An old, noble nest. My study is being renovated, so I decided to hold the shoot here." He wasn't asking. He was stating a fact here. I repeated. "Yes, you have the high ceilings. The crown molding. It looks ... respectable." He thrust the paper at me. "Here's a list. Fix these things by Tuesday." Took the paper automatically. My fingers brushed his. His skin was cold, dry, like parchment. "Those curtains in the living room?" He gestured with a grimace. "Hideous. Take them down. We need heavy velvet. Burgundy or emerald. Something regal." "And the furniture," he continued, not waiting for a response. "Rearrange it according to the diagram. Hide those knickknacks. The porcelain figures. The little cats. It looks cheap. Leave only the leather-bound books." He looked me in the eye. "Everything must look dignified, Althea. Don't let me down. We are doing this for the future." He opened the door. The cold wind rushed in. "And warn Zadie," he added over his shoulder. "Have her dressed decently. No jeans, floor-length dress. Hair pulled back. She needs to look like a worthy daughter of her ... husband." The door slammed. He was gone. But he wasn't really gone. His presence lingered in the apartment like a toxic gas. The smell of his cologne hung in the air, cloying and heavy. The energy in the room was fractured. I stood there for a long moment, clutching the list of demands. Remove the curtains. Move the furniture. Hide my things. Erase my identity. Turn my home into a stage set for his vanity. I looked at the paper. His handwriting was large, sprawling, aggressive. The pen had pressed so hard it almost tore through the paper. I walked into the living room. Zadie had collapsed onto the sofa. She was curled into a ball, shaking. Elroy was still standing by the window. He looked like a ghost. I didn't go to them yet. I walked to the table. I smoothed out the list Cornelius had given me. "It's gone," I said. My voice was calm. Eerily calm. Zadie lifted her head. Her face was a mess of red blotches and mascara tracks. "Mama ... she whispered. He said ... I heard what he said. I cut in. But I need to know what he did." I looked at Elroy. "Investments," I said. The word tasted like ash. He mentioned investments. Elroy didn't turn. It's nothing, Ms. Althea. Just ... Campaign contributions. Don't lie to me. I snapped. The command whipped across the room. Elroy flinched. Tell her, Zadie sobbed. She sat up, clutching a throw pillow to her chest as if it were a shield. Tell her, Elroy, or I will. Elroy stayed silent. Mama, Zadie gasped. It's not contributions. It's loans. I felt the blood drain from my face. Loans. He made us take them out, Zadie cried. In my name. In Elroy's name, how much? I asked. My heart was hammering a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. 50,000, she whispered. I grabbed the back of the chair to steady myself. $50,000. That was just today, she choked out. There were others. 3 others in the last year. For his projects. For his investments. 75,000, Elroy said. His voice was hollow. Total $75,000. And where is the money? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Gone, Elroy said. He finally turned around. His eyes were dead. He transferred it. 2 brokerage firms. He says he's investing, but I checked the names. They aren't real firms, Althea. They're shells. It's a pyramid. It's all a pyramid. I stared at them. $70,000-$5,000. They were drowning. He wasn't just abusing them physically. He was harvesting them. He was eating them alive. He was using my daughter's credit, my son-in-law's name, to fund his delusions of grandeur. Why? I whispered. Why did you sign? He threatened me, Zadie wailed. Fresh tears spilled over. He said he has judges in his pocket. He said he has connections at the courthouse. He told me if I didn't sign, he would have Elroy divorce me. He said he would sue for full custody if we ever had children. She looked at me with wide, terrified eyes. He said he would have me declared mentally incompetent, Mama. He said he would tell the court I was unstable and hysteric, and that with his reputation, everyone would believe him. I looked at the window. Beyond the glass, the city lights twinkled. Somewhere out there, Cornelius Thorne was driving his luxury car. Convinced he was the master of the universe, he had money. Or at least, he had access to ours. He had power. He was on the council committee. He had connections. Judges, bankers, the elite. He had built a fortress around himself. A fortress made of fear and influence. He was invincible. He was a monolith. And what was I? I was a retired archivist. A widow. A woman who forgot her blood pressure pills. Zadie was crying again. Elroy was staring at the floor. They were defeated. They had accepted their fate as cattle in Cornelius's slaughterhouse. I looked down at the paper in my hand. The list of demands, velvet curtains. Burgundy? I felt a spark. A tiny hot spark in the center of my cold chest. He wanted a stage. He wanted a noble atmosphere. He wanted the perfect backdrop for his legacy. Fine, I whispered. I crumpled the paper in my fist. I squeezed it until my knuckles turned white. I squeezed it until I felt the fibers of the paper snap. He wants a show, I said aloud. Zadie looked up. Mama. He wants a show on Tuesday, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that was colder than the wind outside. He wants to show the world who he really is. I walked to the kitchen. I needed matches. We will give him a show, I promised. But he won't like the ending. Struck a match. The flame flared up, bright and hungry. I held it to the corner of his list. I watched the fire curl around his handwriting. I watched his orders turn to black ash. He thought he was a king in his castle. He didn't know the dragon had woken up in the basement. The ash fell. It drifted down like black snow, settling onto the saucer in a soft, crumbling heap. I watched it. I didn't blink. The smell of burnt paper and sulfur filled the kitchen, a sharp, acrid temps that cut through the lingering scent of Cornelius's cologne. Mama, Zadie asked again. Her voice was trembling. She sounded young. So very young. What did you say? I rubbed the ash between my thumb and forefinger. It smeared. A dark, greasy stain on my skin. I said, I turned to face them, my voice steady, that the crying stops now. I walked to the sink. I turned on the tap. The water rushed out cold and clear. I thrust my hands under the stream. I scrubbed the soot from my skin. The water swirled gray, spiraling down the drain. Go to bed, I ordered. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. Both of you. Take a sleeping pill. Close your eyes. Do not think about the money. Do not think about the loans. Do not think about him. But Althea Elroy started, his voice cracking. $75,000. He'll destroy us. I turned off the tap. The sudden silence in the kitchen was heavy. He won't, I said. I dried my hands on a towel. Because he won't get the chance. Now go. They obeyed. They were so used to obeying. They walked down the hallway like ghosts, shoulders slumped. Defeated by the weight of a man who wasn't even in the room. I heard their door click shut. I was alone. The apartment was quiet, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with the invisible debris of the evening. The fear, the humiliation, the threat. I sat down at the kitchen table. The darkness pressed against the windows. I didn't cry. I had cried enough in my life. I had cried when my husband died. I had cried when Zadie fell off her bike. I had cried from happiness and from sorrow. But tears are water. They wash things away. I didn't need to wash anything away. I needed to burn it down. I sat there, in the dark, and I thought about dragons. Cornelius Thorne was a dragon. He had the scales, his expensive suits. He had the fire, his temper. He had the hoard, his stolen money. He believed he was apex. He believed that because he roared the loudest, he ruled the jungle. But I knew something about dragons. I had read about them in the dusty manuscripts of the county archives for 40 years. You don't fight a dragon with a sword. You don't charge at it screaming. If you do, you get burned. To kill a dragon, you find the loose scale, the soft spot in the armor, the one place where the beast is vulnerable, and every beast has a soft spot. Cornelius was arrogant. That was his shield. But it was also his blindfold. He thought I was a gray mouse. He thought I was a foolish old woman who cared about tea and blood, pressure. He didn't know who I really was. I wasn't just a mother. I wasn't just a widow. I was the head archivist of the county. For 4 decades, I had organized the city's memory. I knew where the bodies were buried metaphorically and sometimes literally. I knew who owned the land before the skyscrapers went up. I knew who paid their taxes and who didn't. I knew whose birth certificates were ink and whose were lies. Documents don't scream. They don't posture. They don't threaten. They just hold the truth, waiting, patient. Eternal Cornelius thought power was noise. I knew power was paper. I looked at the clock. 3 a.m., a memory surfaced. It floated up from the deep recesses of my mind, clear and sharp as glass. Etta, Cornelius single quotes as late wife. My best friend. I remembered the day she died. 20 years ago. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and wilting lilies. She was so small in that bed. Her skin was like parchment. She had grabbed my hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. A desperate claw-like grip. Althea, she had whispered. Her eyes were wide, feverish. The box. You promised, I promised, I had whispered back. He can never know, she rasped. If he finds it, he will destroy everything. He will erase it. Promise me. Hide it. Keep it safe until the end, I promise, Etta. She died 2 hours later. I had taken the box. A heavy metal lockbox. I hadn't opened it. I hadn't looked inside. A promise is a promise. An archivist takes stewardship seriously. I had filed it away, deep in the vaults. Shelf 17, row D, under unclaimed private effects. I had hoped the day would never come. I had hoped to let the dead rest. I had let Cornelius play the grieving widower. I had let him play the great patriarch. I had kept the piece of her memory, but yesterday. He raised a hand to my daughter. Yesterday, he stole my family's future. The statute of limitations had expired. I stood up. My knees popped. My back ached. But my mind was crystalline. The dragon had a loose scale. Etta had given it to me. I just had to go and dig it up. I went to my bedroom. I didn't sleep. I laid out my clothes for the morning, my gray wool coat, my sensible shoes, my reading glasses. It was a costume. It was the uniform of the invisible woman, the disguise of the harmless grandmother. I would wear it. I would walk into his world looking like prey, and I would gut him. The sun rose. It was a pale, watery light that offered no warmth. The city woke up with a groan of traffic and sirens. I dressed in silence. I buttoned my coat all the way to the chin. I checked my reflection in the hallway mirror. A tired face looked back. Wrinkles, gray hair pulled into a tight bun. Eyes that looked faded behind thick lenses. Perfect, Mama. Zadie shuffled into the hallway. She looked terrible. Her eyes were swollen shut. Where are you going? Pharmacy, I lied smoothly. My pills, and I need some air. I'll be back by lunch. Be careful, she whispered. I will, I said. I stepped out into the street. The wind was biting. It whipped at my coat, trying to push me back. I lowered my head and walked into it. My destination wasn't the pharmacy. I walked past the coffee shops, past the busy businessmen rushing to their glass towers, past the noise of the modern world. I turned down a quiet side street. There it was, the old Merchants Guild building. It was massive, stone, Gothic. It crouched between two modern skyscrapers. Like a gargoyle, the city archives dot my kingdom. I walked up the stone steps. They were worn down in the center by a century of feet seeking truth. I pushed open the heavy oak doors. The smell hit me instantly. It was better than perfume. It was better than fresh bread. It was the smell of dust, of drying ink, of binding glue and decaying cellulose. It was the smell of time itself, trapped in a bottle. The air inside was cool and still. The noise of the city vanished the moment the door clicked shut behind me. Here, the silence was respectful. It was a church of facts. Ms. Althea. The young intern at the front desk looked up. Sarah, bright eyes. Messy hair. She smiled. We haven't seen you in months. How is retirement? Quiet, Sarah. I smiled back. My grandmother's smile. Just quiet. I decided to come visit. Check on some old friends. Look up a few things for my memoirs. Of course she beamed. She didn't ask for a pass. She didn't ask for ID. I was part of the furniture here. You know the way I do? I walked past the desk. I walked past the public reading room. I swiped my old badge at the heavy steel door marked Restricted Access. The light on the reader turned green. A soft click. I pulled the handle. The door swung open. The vault lay before me. It was a cavern of shadows and metal. Rows and rows of shelving stretched into the gloom, endless and orderly. It was a labyrinth of boxes. Millions of lives reduced to paper, filed away and forgotten. I took a breath. My heart beat a steady war drum rhythm against my ribs. I wasn't Althea the victim anymore. I wasn't the mother-in-law. I was the hunter. And this was my forest. I began to walk. My heels clicked on the concrete floor. Row A, row B, row C. I turned the corner. Row D. I counted the shelves. 12, 13, 14. My hands were sweating. I wiped them on my coat. 15, 16, 17. I stopped. The shelf was high. Dust motes danced in the beam of the lone overhead light. There it was, tucked in the far back corner, covered in a thick gray blanket of neglect. A metal box. Rusted at the edges, I reached up. My fingers brushed the cold metal. Cornelius thought he was the author of this story. He thought he held the pen. He was wrong. I gripped the box and pulled. It was heavy. Heavy with secrets. Heavy with the weight of 20 years of silence. Held it to my chest. The dragon was sleeping, and I had just found the sword. The metal box was cold against my chest. It felt like holding a block of ice. Or a bomb. I carried it to the reading table in the back corner. This was the dead zone, the spot furthest from the door, furthest from prying eyes. The bulb above the table flickered with a low electric buzz. It was the only sound in the vault, aside from the steady, rhythmic thumping of my own heart. I set the box down. Thud. Dust puffed up around the edges, dancing in the pale light. I ran my hand over the lid. It was gray steel, scratched and scarred. A simple lockbox. The kind you buy at a hardware store to keep petty cash or family photos. But this didn't hold photos. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my keychain. On it, tucked between my house key and the key to the cabin, was a small brass key. Etta had given it to me that day in the hospital. I had carried it for 20 years. It was worn smooth by my thumb, a talisman of a promise I hoped I'd never have to keep. I slid the key into the lock. It resisted for a moment, stiff with age. Then, with a sharp snap, it turned. The latch popped open. The smell hit me first. Not dust this time, but lavender. Dried, ancient lavender. Etta used to keep sachets in her drawers. The scent was faint, ghost-like, but it brought tears to my eyes instantly. It was the smell of a gentlewoman who had lived in fear. I lifted the lid. Inside, there was no gold. No jewelry. Just paper, stacks of envelopes, yellowed and brittle. A thick, leather-bound notebook. And a large manila envelope sealed with red wax. I reached for the letters first. My hands trembled. I felt like an intruder. I was violating the sanctity of the dead. But the living were in danger, and Etta would understand. I unfolded the first letter. The paper was thin, almost translucent. Etta's handwriting was small, beaded, and frantic. Dearest Althea, the ink was faded to a rusty brown. 1978, October. I adjusted my glasses. The silence of the archive seemed to press in closer. Eager to hear the secret. I don't know how to live with this lie, Etta wrote. Cornelius forbids me to speak. He says if the town finds out, he will end it all. He says a man who cannot sire a son is not a man. He scares me, Althea. He looks at me with such hate, as if it is my fault. But the doctors, they were clear. I swallowed hard. The lump in my throat was painful. I picked up the leather notebook. It wasn't a diary. It was a medical log. It had the stamp of a private clinic on the cover. St. Jude's Urology and Fertility. It's closed down in the late 90s. I opened it. The pages crinkled loudly. I scanned the dates. 1978. The year Elroy was born. My finger traced the lines of clinical, unfeeling text. Patient Thorne C. Dobb, 1955. Diagnosis orchitis. Post-pubertal complications. Severe atrophy, and then the word. The word that would bring down an empire. Conclusion, azoospermia. Absolute sterility, irreversible. I sat back in the hard wooden chair. The air in the vault felt suddenly thin. Sterile. Cornelius Thorne. The man who prattled on about his seed. The man who obsessed over bloodlines and genes. The man who treated Elroy like a disappointed king looking at a failure of an heir. He was a blank, a biological dead end. I looked back at the box. There was more. The manila envelope. I broke the wax seal. It crumbled into red dust on the table. Inside were legal documents. Or rather, illegal ones. A birth certificate. Elroy Thorne. Father Cornelius Thorne. Mother Etta Thorne. It looked perfect. The seal. The signature. But underneath it was another paper. Carbon copy. Flimsy pink paper. Adoption transfer record. State orphanage no for boy. Unnamed. On the receipt. A receipt for a donation to the orphanage's renovation fund. $10,000. A fortune in 1978. And a note scrawled in Cornelius's heavy, aggressive hand. Burn original files. No traces. He is mine. I put the papers down. My hands were cold. Ice cold. The picture was forming in my mind. A grotesque, twisted mosaic. Cornelius finds out he is sterile. His ego, fragile as glass, shatters. He cannot bear the shame. He cannot be the end of the line. So he buys a child. He buys Elroy. He covers his tracks with bribes and threats. He forces Etta to wear a pillow, to feign a pregnancy, to disappear for confinement. He builds a lie, a massive, towering monument to his own virility. But here was the twisted part. Here was the true horror. He didn't love the boy he bought. He hated him. Every time Cornelius looked at Elroy, didn't see a son. He saw a reminder. He saw proof of his own defect. He saw a stranger wearing his name. That's why he beat him. That's why he belittled him. That's why he crushed Elroy's spirit every single day. It wasn't discipline. It was resentment. He punished Elroy for the crime of not being his blood. And at the same time, he demanded Elroy be worthy of a bloodline that he didn't even possess. It was madness. It was a cruel, psychological torture chamber that had lasted for 30 years. "Oh, Elroy," I whispered into the silence. "You poor, sweet boy." Elroy spent his whole life thinking he was a disappointment, thinking he had bad genes, thinking he wasn't strong enough, sharp enough, thrown enough. He had carried the weight of his father's disappointment like a cross, but the cross was made of balsa wood. It was fake. Cornelius wasn't his father. Elroy owed him nothing. Not his loyalty, not his fear, and certainly not his money. I looked at the documents again. This wasn't just dirt. This was a nuclear warhead. If this got out, Cornelius wasn't just a liar. He was a fraud. His entire campaign for city council was built on the narrative of the Thorne dynasty, the old money, the heritage. If the voters knew he bought his heir, if they knew he forged documents, he would be a laughingstock. But worse than that, if Elroy knew, if Elroy knew, the chains would break. The fear would vanish. You don't fear a stranger who kidnapped you. You fight him. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. The heavy cold stone of anxiety was cracking. Heat was pouring out. Rage. Pure, clarifying rage. How dare he? How dare he torture my daughter for disrespecting the family when the family was a fiction? How dare he lecture us on tradition? I carefully gathered the papers. I didn't fold them. I treated them with reverence. These were the keys to the prison cells. I placed them back in the manila envelope. I put the notebook and Etta's letters into my large tote bag. I buried them under my knitting wool and a bag of cough drops. Camouflage. I stood up. I shoved the empty metal box back onto the shelf. Let it gather dust. Its job was done. I walked back down the aisle. My footsteps sounded different now. On the way in, they had been tentative, clicking softly. Now, they were firm, hard, clack, clack, clack. They sounded like a judge's gavel striking the bench. I reached the front desk. Sarah looked up, blowing a bubble with her gum. "Find what you needed, Ms. Althea." She, CHIRPED. I paused. I patted my bag. I could feel the sharp corner of the notebook pressing against my hip. "Yes, Sarah," I said. My voice was low. "I found exactly what I needed. Was it helpful for your memoirs?" I smiled. It wasn't a grandmother's smile. It was a wolf's smile. "Oh, it wasn't for a memoir, dear," I said. "It's for a tragedy. Or maybe a comedy. It depends on who is watching." I pushed open the heavy oak doors. The city noise rushed in to meet me. Horns, sirens, the chaos of life. But I didn't flinch. I stepped out onto the street. The wind was still cold, but I didn't feel it. I was burning with a secret that could level a building. I took out my phone. I dialed a number. It rang once, twice. "Hello." Cornelius's voice, impatient, arrogant. "Ms. Althea, I'm busy. Make it quick." I stopped on the sidewalk. People flowed around me like water around a rock. "Good morning, Cornelius," I said. My voice was sweet, dripping with syrup. "I hope I'm not interrupting your important state affairs." "I told you I'm busy," he snapped. What is it? It's about the dinner, I said. The one you wanted. To celebrate your campaign. Yes. I was thinking. I paused for effect. You were right. We should do it properly. Invite the best people. The bankers. The editors. The pillars of society. I could hear the greed in his silence. He loved an audience. Well, he grunted. That sounds ... appropriate. Can you handle the catering? I don't want cheap wine. Oh, don't worry, Cornelius, I said, gripping the phone tight. I will serve exactly what you deserve. Fine, Saturday, 7 p.m. Don't be late. He hung up. I lowered the phone. I looked at the dark screen. Saturday, I whispered. I had 2 days. 2 days to prepare the stage. 2 days to sharpen the knife. He thought he was coming to a coronation. He didn't know he was coming to an execution. The call ended. The phone was buzzing in my hand. I lowered it slowly. I stood on the sidewalk for a full minute watching the world rush past. They saw a woman with a gray coat and a determined face. They had no idea I was holding a death sentence in my purse. I had 2 days. 2 days to transform the mouse into the matriarch. I had to play the part. I had to convince Cornelius and, more importantly, Zadie and Elroy that I was simply a devoted mother-in-law supporting the family's legacy. I walked back to the apartment. The oppressive air of fear was still thick. Zadie and Elroy were huddled in the kitchen, staring at the crumpled list of financial transactions. It's Saturday, I announced calmly. We have a dinner party. Zadie looked up, confused. Mama, what are you talking about? We're ruined. We have 3 days until that loan payment is due. We can't host anyone. Oh, yes, we can, I said. I pulled out a small notepad. Cornelius has agreed to let us host a small, informal launch dinner for his campaign. Right here, in our respectable, high-ceilinged home. Elroy looked horrified. He's going to use your house for his lies. You agreed to that? I insisted on it. I corrected. I smiled, but it was a cold, sharp feeling in my mouth. I told him it was time for the family to show solidarity. I told him I wanted to help finance his campaign. They stared at me like I had lost my mind. Mama, Zadie pleaded, we barely have enough for groceries. Where will you get money for velvet drapes and sturgeon? We won't, I said. I placed my bag on the counter. I will handle the decor. I will handle the menu. You two will handle yourselves. You will look calm. You will look supportive. You will wear the mask of the dutiful son and wife. I needed to sell the lie to my own children first. Their conviction was my camouflage. Cornelius believes he has broken me, I explained. He believes that because I am old, I am weak. He believes that because I didn't scream when I saw his list of demands, I accepted them. He thinks he can manipulate me with his pride and his promises of power. I paused, leaning close. My voice dropped to the precise, slow rhythm the enemy voice enjoyed. He wants to be seen as the patriarch, the great provider, the man of pedigree. We will give him that stage. The grander the stage, the more devastating the fall. I took a deep breath. I walked over to the phone and started dialing. The number belonged to Lucille Calloway, the city's most accomplished gossip and former mayor's widow. First order of business, I said. We need guests. My goal was not to invite Cornelius's friends. My goal was to invite his auditors, his worst fears. I spent the next 2 days working. I didn't rush. I didn't panic. My archival work taught me patience. A minute detail missed today is a catastrophic error tomorrow. My hands, usually covered in the fine dust of history, were busy. I didn't shop for burgundy velvet. Instead, I removed the heavy, depressing curtains Cornelius hated, leaving the windows bare to the pale afternoon light. The room felt open, exposed, ready. I polished the silverware. Every knife, every fork, every spoon was buffed to a mirror shine. They would reflect the truth perfectly. The kitchen was busy, but I didn't cook. I ordered the catering from an expensive, neutral firm. I needed my energy for strategy, not for sauces. The most important part was the guest list. My contact list was old, reliable, and powerful. I called Lucille Calloway first. Lucille, a charming, ruthless woman, had a tongue sharper than any saber. "Lucille, darling," I cooed into the phone. "It's Althea. You simply must come this Saturday. Cornelius is launching his campaign. We are hosting a small, intimate gathering of the city's real founders. Cornelius." Lucille sniffed. "I haven't the time for that puffed-up peacock, dear. He bores me with his talk of noble roots." This was my opening. "Oh, I agree completely," I whispered conspiratorially. "But I need your eyes, Lucille. I'm concerned about his financial contributions. There are ... discrepancies. I was hoping you could tell me if his grandfather really was the war hero he claims to be. You know the family records better than anyone. I didn't accuse, I just wondered." I planted a seed of doubt, and Lucille, the master telegraph operator, immediately took the bait. "Discrepancies, you say? Well, I suppose a small glass of wine wouldn't hurt, Althea. I'll be there." Click. The first auditor was secured. Next. I called Mr. Henderson, the head of the credit department at First National Bank, the bank that held Zadie's crippling loans. I used the same soft voice. The tired, panicked mother. "Robert, I am terrified. Zadie's husband, Elroy, is acting strangely. So supportive of his father's campaign. He insists we throw this dinner. Could you possibly attend? Just to see who else is funding Cornelius. I'm worried about my daughter's assets, Robert. I need a friendly face there." Robert, thinking he was doing a favor for a poor, distressed old colleague, agreed to come as an informal guest. Would bring his professional auditor's eye directly to the center of the trap. I invited the editor of the City Gazette, paper Cornelius desperately needed to endorse his candidacy. I invited Dr. Abernathy, the old family physician who knew everyone's real history, including perhaps ETAs. I was not planning a dinner. I was assembling a jury Friday night. I sat alone at the kitchen table running through the details. Everything had to be perfect. The food, the wine, the lighting, the illusion of perfection. I looked at the documents in my bag. The medical file. The adoption papers. The proof of fraud. The weight of the secret felt immense. It was crushing. It was beautiful. I pulled out the paper. I read the numbers again. $75,000. Zadie's future dissolved by a liar's ego. I reached for my checkbook. I knew I couldn't pay off the loans, but I could buy time. I had savings from the sale of my parents' cabin. My own safety net. I wrote a check. I signed my name clearly. I paid the interest and a small portion of the principal on the first loan. It was a gesture of faith. More importantly, it made me officially a creditor. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I had skin in the game. I was owed. That gave me a voice. That gave me power. I folded the canceled check and tucked it into the medical file. Everything connected. The financial abuse was now intertwined with the biological lie. The two threads of his deception were woven together into a single, lethal rope. I put the folder My True Guest of Honor on the sideboard, hidden discreetly under a napkin, right next to the dessert forks. I checked the dining room one last time. The snow-white tablecloth. The silver sparkling under the chandelier. The bare windows reflecting the cold. Empty street. It was a beautiful stage. Saturday, 6:45 p.m. I heard the doorbell ring. I stood in the foyer. I was wearing my dark green dress and the small, quiet brooch my husband gave me. My hair was neat. My face was a blank mask of polite deference. Cornelius was the first to arrive 10 minutes early, followed by Elroy and Zadie, who were trembling slightly beneath their masks of obedience. Cornelius swept past me, handing me his heavy cashmere coat without looking. "Is the wine list appropriate, Althea?" he demanded. "I won't tolerate cheap Merlot." "Everything is top tier, Cornelius," I said, my voice sweet and low. "Fit for a man of your ... stature," he beamed. He didn't see the double meaning. He didn't see the trap. He only saw the confirmation of his own greatness. He walked into the living room, ready for his coronation. He had no idea the house was full of ghosts, and the most dangerous ghost was holding the knife. The clock ticked toward 7. The quiet apartment had been transformed. It no longer smelled of dust and fear. It smelled of linen. It smelled of polished silver. It smelled of expensive ignorance. I stood by the dining room entrance, waiting. Zadie was pale, standing rigid next to the coat rack. Elroy was sweating through his best suit jacket. They were terrified. They looked like prisoners waiting for the jury to arrive. I told them to breathe. I told them to hold the lie. The doorbell rang. The first guests. This was not a celebratory dinner. This was a spectacle. This was a public trial. And I was the playwright. The wolves arrived, one by one. First, Lucille Calloway, the mayor's widow. She swept in, draped in severe black velvet, her lips pursed. She didn't come to eat. She came to collect information. She was the one who remembered the city's real history. Next, Robert Henderson, head of First National Bank's credit division. He wore a nervous professional smile. He thought he was here to support a friend. He was really here to audit his biggest fraud case. Then Dr. Abernathy, the old physician who had seen every birth, every death, and every secret in this county for 50 years. He carried the moral weight of the city. The noise level rose immediately. It wasn't cheerful noise. It was the careful, measured sound of people watching their manners. Every glance was a calculation. Every greeting, a question. I directed them to the living room. They accepted small glasses of sherry. They avoided the bare windows. They examined the furniture. They were looking for the flaw, the thing I had hinted at over the phone. And then Cornelius arrived. He walked in like a conqueror returning from a minor skirmish. He was 10 minutes late. He enjoyed the pause. He wanted everyone to wait. He was wearing a new graphite suit. His gold cufflinks gleamed under the chandelier light. He reeked of pride. His expensive cologne was cloying. It was the smell of a man convinced of his own destiny. He didn't just greet the guests. He received them. Lucille. "My dear," he boomed. He kissed her hand with condescending flourish. "So glad you could attend. People are drawn to leaders, aren't they?" Lucille smiled thinly. "Indeed, Cornelius. I am very interested in your platform this year, especially the financial transparency section." You missed the sarcasm entirely. He simply nodded and moved on. He loved the sound of his own importance. He ignored Elroy and Zadie almost completely. He simply gestured to them with a sweep of his hand. "My family, they are here to offer support. They understand what is required of a Thorne." Zadie shrank back. Elroy's jaw tightened. They were playing their part perfectly. The obedient children. I watched them all. Lucille, watching Cornelius. Henderson, watching Elroy's nervous twitch. And Cornelius, watching no one but his own reflection in the highly polished silverware. He believed he was surrounded by admirers. He was actually surrounded by a highly curated circle of wolves and judges. We moved to the dining room. The table was exquisite. White damask, crystal, my husband's best silver flatware. Every setting was perfect. Cornelius walked to the head of the table. He didn't wait. He sat down instantly. A true patriarch doesn't ask permission. He assumes command. He began to talk. The soup was served. Cream of wild mushroom. Expensive, subtle, but no one tasted it. Cornelius talked about his grandfather. The war hero, the cavalry commander. The man who established the family fortune. "It's my line," he announced, raising his glass of fine Bordeaux. "We are the steel spine of this city. My father built the factories. I manage the wealth. And Elroy, my son, will carry the name into the next century." He looked at Elroy. It wasn't a look of pride. It was a look of ownership. Lucille Calloway coughed lightly. A quiet, dry sound. "Excuse me, Cornelius," she said. Her voice was soft, but it carried across the table like a whip crack. "You mentioned your grandfather." "The Major." "Yes, Lucille. A true guardsman." He beamed. "How interesting," she mused, adjusting her brooch. I was just at the archives the other day, reading through the old employee registries from '53. Fascinating stuff. I believe I saw a Thorne listed, but not a pipe fitter at the municipal boiler plant. The air pressure in the room dropped. Cornelius froze mid-sip. He didn't spill the wine. He just froze. His eyes flickered to Lucille. The shark's smile was gone, replaced by a flash of naked hostility. "Lucille, dear," he chuckled, forcing the sound out. "A misunderstanding, surely. A clerical error. There were many Thornes in the city. Mine was serving in the reserves at the time." "Of course," Lucille said easily. She lifted her spoon and tasted her soup. But she exchanged a look with Dr. Abernathy. A tiny, imperceptible nod. The seed of doubt had been planted. The first pinprick. The other guests were silent. They weren't reacting, but watching. They sensed the shift in the atmosphere. The temperature was dropping. The tension was rising. Cornelius recovered. He changed the subject instantly. He turned the spotlight onto his campaign. He began discussing his financial policies. The need for prudent investment. The management of vast family resources. He was using the words he thought he owned. Prudence. Resources.I watched Robert Henderson, the banker. His face was passive, professional. But his eyes were focused on Elroy and Zadie. He was searching for the debt. He was searching for the fear. He was putting the pieces of the pyramid scheme together in his head. I watched Zadie. She was sitting with perfect posture, clutching her napkin. Her eyes were dull, empty. She had retreated behind a wall of perfect obedience. I knew the moment was approaching. Cornelius was getting reckless. The initial challenge from Lucille had agitated him. He was performing too hard. He needed to reassert his dominance. The main course arrived. Roast sturgeon, plated elegantly. "This is good fish, Althea," Cornelius praised, his mouth full. Finally, something appropriate for the Thorne standard. "Zadie, be sure you thank your mother for her contribution to the campaign fund." He emphasized the word contribution. It was a signal, a reminder to Elroy and Zadie that they were indebted. They had given him the money. They were cattle to be milked. He lifted his glass again. "The crystal tinkled to the future," he announced. "To the continuation of true nobility in this region. To the Thorne name." He drained his glass. He was arrogant. He was loud. He was completely blind. I sat there, calm, my hands resting neatly in my lap. I was the silent gray mouse. I glanced down at the sideboard next to me. The heavy manila folder was still there. Hidden under the napkin, my weapon, my truth. I felt the heat rising in my chest. The cold, crystalline rage from the night before was ready to burst. The climax was coming. The moment he reached out to seize something that was not his, Cornelius slammed his glass down onto the table. It was the sound of a general's baton hitting a map. "Zadie." He barked suddenly. He glared down the table. "Look at the table. The glasses are empty. Are you asleep? Tend to your guests. What did your mother teach you about service?" Zadie flinched violently. The sudden public aggression snapped the tension in the room. She scrambled up. Her chair scraped loudly against the wooden floor. She reached for the Bordeaux bottle. Her hands were shaking so hard the bottle clattered against the ice. Bucket. The inevitable happened. The bottle slipped. Red wine spilled across the crisp, white damask tablecloth. It spread rapidly. A crimson stain. "Like blood," Cornelius roared. He threw his napkin onto the table. His face turned instantly, violently crimson. He raised his hand. It was a reflex, trained by years of impunity. He intended to strike her. Right there. In front of the city's elite, Elroy covered his face. Zadie let out a small, terrified gasp. But the blow never landed. I rose from my chair, slowly, calmly, without a sound. My silence, for 40 years, had protected him now. My silence was over. I rose from my chair slowly. My joints protested, but I ignored them. I walked toward Zadie, I walked toward the raging crimson figure of Cornelius. He still had his hand raised, frozen mid-strike. His face was a mask of furious contempt. He saw me approaching, but he didn't register the danger. He saw the gray mouse coming to clean up the spill. I reached Zadie. I placed my hand gently on her shoulder. My palm was warm, a quiet anchor in the hurricane of his rage. Then I looked at Cornelius. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. In the absolute silence of the dining room, my whisper was a thunderclap. "No," I said. My voice was quiet, flat, cold. It was the sound of a judge's final verdict. I didn't step back. I looked straight into his eyes. His pupils were black dots of pure fury. "She will not be pouring," I stated. "She is not the help, and she is certainly not your property." Cornelius slowly lowered his hand. He blinked. He couldn't compute the defiance. "Not from me. Not from the furniture, Althea," he hissed. The name was Venom. "What did you say? You dare dictate to me. In my house. In the presence of my peers." "This isn't your house, Cornelius," I corrected him. My voice was utterly calm. I took the bottle of spilled wine from Zadie's trembling hand and set it down. "And this isn't about property," I continued. "This is about debt and the destruction of my daughter's future." I saw the flicker of panic in his eyes. He realized the conversation had shifted. He knew he had skeletons. He didn't know I had the X-Rise debt. He sneered, trying to recover. He puffed out his chest. "I have no debt. I am a council candidate. I am a Thorne. I manage vast resources. Zadie is emotional. She speaks nonsense." I ignored his bluster. I turned toward the sideboard. I lifted the white linen napkin. The manila folder was waiting. It was heavy with the weight of truth. I pulled it out. I let the red wax seal catch the light. I walked back to the table. I didn't throw it. I placed it gently on the table, right next to his plate. Right onto the spilled wine. The red stain immediately began to seep into the porous paper of the envelope. "That," I said, pointing to the folder, "is the reality. It's the bill for your arrogance. It's the cost of your campaign contributions." I slid the folder toward Robert Henderson, the banker. "Mr. Henderson," I addressed the banker directly. My voice was respectful, professional. "As a dedicated member of First National, I assume you recognize these forms. 3 consumer loans, all executed in the last year, all signed by Zadie and Elroy Thorne." Henderson, realizing he had been ambushed, blinked. He reluctantly reached for the file. The weight of his professional duty outweighed his social discomfort. He opened the folder. He saw the photocopied loan agreements. He saw the figures. $75,000. "This is outrageous," Cornelius shouted. He was shaking now. His cashmere jacket suddenly looked ridiculous. "This is an ambush. These documents are fraudulent. This woman is insane." I looked at Cornelius. My eyes were cold. "I am the former head archivist of the county. My documents are rarely fraudulent, Cornelius. But let's look at the movement of funds, shall we?" Henderson, pale and silent, was already turning the page. The banking information, the transfer records. "The money," I continued, speaking clearly to the whole table, "was immediately liquidated. Transferred on the same day to 3 different brokerage accounts. Accounts belonging to Crypto Guarantee, Horizon Investments, and Phoenix Trust." I paused. I let the names hang in the silence. I didn't need to say more. Henderson's face said it all. He lowered the paper slowly. He looked up at Cornelius. His professional demeanor cracked. "Mr. Thorne," Henderson's voice was low, appalled. "Crypto Guarantee dissolved 6 months ago. They were officially classified as an investment shell, a pyramid scheme." The words hung in the air. Pyramid scheme. A wave of shock went around the table. The City Gazette editor gasped. Lucille Calloway pressed a gloved hand to her mouth. "You took $75,000, Lucille whispered, scandalized. "From your own daughter-in-law. and you threw it away on a shell game." Cornelius erupted. He slammed his fist onto the table. The crystal glasses jumped. It was high-risk capital. He roared. He was sweating now. His hair was plastered to his temples. The mask was shredded. I was due a massive return. The committee needed funds. This old witch wants to ruin me. He lunged toward me. His eyes were wild. He wanted the folder back. He wanted to silence the paper. "Give me those files, you hag." I didn't move. I let him get close. Close enough for every guest to see the raw, exposed violence in his face. "Do you deny," I asked, utterly fearless, "that you threatened to destroy Zadie's marriage? Do you deny you threatened to have her declared mentally incompetent? Do you deny you forced a terrified woman to sign her name to this fraud?" Cornelius froze. His chest was heaving. He searched for a lie. But too many witnesses were watching. Robert Henderson, who now had the full context of the debt. Lucille, who had just seen the patriarch try to physically assault an elderly woman. He looked at Elroy, his last, desperate hope. "Son." Cornelius wheezed. "You tell them. This was for your campaign, for your future. Tell them this is a temporary setback." Elroy, who had been sitting paralyzed, finally raised his head. He looked at the wine stain. He looked at the trembling hands of his wife. He looked at the banker holding the evidence of his own enslavement. He slowly shook his head. "No, Father," he whispered. "The future was Zadie's, and you stole it." The denial hit Cornelius like a hammer. His own son. The person he had controlled for decades. The silence in the room was absolute. But I knew this wasn't the end. This was just the financial execution. The public humiliation of the lineage was still to come. I had cut his purse strings, but I hadn't cut his ego. He needed to be completely eradicated. I looked at the table, at the red wine seeping into the cloth, at the terror in Zadie's eyes. I needed to break the very foundation of his identity. I reached for the second folder. It was tucked against the sideboard leg, discreetly wrapped in my knitting wool. The one containing the medical records. "You talk so much about the future, Cornelius," I said. My voice was quiet, almost sympathetic. "But perhaps we should look at the past. The real history that makes you who you are." I pulled out the file. Cornelius's face went from crimson rage to an awful greenish white. He recognized the notebook. He knew exactly what it was. The color drained from his eyes. Fear, raw animal terror. "No," he whispered. His voice was a dry, choking sound. "Althea, don't you dare." I opened the folder. The time for mercy was over. No. The word left Cornelius's mouth as a choked gasp. It was a sound of absolute naked terror. He had recognized the folder. He recognized the heavy, tattered notebook inside. The medical file. His face was ghastly. The greenish-white color of old plaster. The fear of financial ruin was nothing. This was existential dread. He lunged for the file. His hand shot out across the table, knocking over a crystal water goblet. Water streamed across the white linen. "Althea, you won't dare," he shrieked. The baritone was gone, replaced by a high, desperate falsetto. I was faster. My archivist reflexes were sharp. I pulled the file back just before his fingers grasped the edge. "Dare." I smiled. It was the first honest smile I had shown all night. "Cornelius, I stopped daring when you put your fist in my daughter's hair. This is necessary." I looked around the table. The guests were stunned into complete paralysis. Robert Henderson, the banker, was holding the fraud file, his eyes wide. Lucille Calloway was watching with the breathless intensity of a hawk. "You love to talk about blood, Cornelius," I stated clearly. My voice was calm, unwavering. "You love to preach about the Thorne dynasty, about passing on genes, about the price of nobility." I opened the folder. I lifted the old yellowed medical chart. It was dated October 1978, I believe. I continued, addressing Dr. Abernathy directly. "That you, doctor, understand medical terminology. Perhaps you can explain to our council candidate what a zoospermia means." Dr. Abernathy, whose face was lined with 50 years of discretion, slowly took off his glasses. He looked at the chart. He read the clinical notes. His expression shifted from surprise to grim realization. "It means," Cornelius, the old doctor said, his voice quiet, "that a man cannot father a child. Sterility, permanent." The word hung in the air like poisoned smoke. Cornelius swayed on his feet. He looked like a puppet whose strings had just been cut. His entire life was built on this one lie. Then I turned my attention to the last person who needed to hear the truth, Elroy. My son-in-law raised his head slowly. He looked up at me. His eyes were blank. He didn't understand yet. "Is not your father, Elroy," I said. The words were soft, but they detonated in the room. "Your father," I continued, watching Cornelius crumble, "cannot have children. Your father bought you. He bought you from an orphanage in the next county in 1978. He paid the doctor. He forged the birth certificate. He covered his tracks to preserve his fake history." I placed the forged birth certificate and the adoption receipt down on the table. The contrast between the official-looking ink and the brittle pink receipt was jarring. The silence was the deepest I had ever heard. It was the sound of a universe collapsing. Elroy slowly pushed his chair back. The scrape of wood on the floor was deafening. He rose to his full height. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the man he had called Pop for 30 years. "Is it true?" Elroy asked. His voice was a flat, dead monotone. "Pop, is it true?" Cornelius couldn't speak. He stared at the adoption papers. He stared at the medical chart. His greatest fear exposed in front of the entire city's hierarchy. He found his voice. It was a strangled sound. "All right." He screamed. "Don't listen to her. She's lying. She wants to divide us. She's jealous of our family." "Family?" Elroy repeated. A tear finally tracked down his cheek. But it wasn't a tear of pain. It was a tear of liberation. Spent my entire life. Elroy's voice cracked, but gained power, telling me I was a disappointment. Telling me I wasn't worthy of the Thorne blood. "You beat me with a belt because I wasn't man enough to be your son. And all this time, there was no blood." He took a step toward Cornelius. The shift in power was absolute. The son had finally surpassed the father. "You made me hate myself," Elroy said. "You punished me because I was proof of your own inadequacy." Cornelius lunged. It was pure animal reaction. He went for Elroy's throat. "I raised you. I made you," he roared. But this time he was stopped. Zadie, my quiet, terrified daughter, moved like a streak of lightning. She stepped between the two men. She stood in front of Elroy. Her shoulders were squared. Her face was set in a mask of cold determination. "Don't you dare touch him," Zadie said. Her voice was strong, clear, resonant. The tears were gone, replaced by steel. Cornelius stopped. He looked at Zadie, then he looked at me. His eyes were darting wildly. He had lost control of his victims. He had lost his legacy. He had lost his mind. He was trapped, financially exposed, biologically destroyed. And standing before him were two people who no longer feared him. He was nothing but a shell, a costume with no man inside. I looked at the guests. They were the jury. They had seen the truth. They had witnessed the cruelty and the lie. The time for justice had arrived. Cornelius stood frozen. His hand, moments ago raised in fury, was now trembling. He looked at Zadie, standing defiant. He looked at Elroy, his eyes blazing with the fire of 30 years of suppressed truth. He saw his world crumble into dust. His eyes darted to the guests. Lucille Calloway was watching him with undisguised contempt. Robert Henderson was meticulously folding the fraud documents. The jury had reached its verdict. Cornelius tried one last, desperate maneuver. He reached out to Elroy. He changed his tone instantly. From tyrant to pathetic supplicant. "Son," he wheezed. His voice cracked, wet with crocodile tears. "They're tearing us apart. That old woman bewitched you. I know I was strict, but I did it for you, for your future." He took a pitiful step forward. "Come on, let's go home. We're family. I forgive your temporary madness. Let's leave this hysteria behind." He reached out his hand, the hand that had just struck his wife, the hand that signed her life into ruin. Elroy looked at that hand. He looked at the gold signet ring on the heavy finger, the ring that symbolized a bloodline that was a lie. He looked at Zadie, his wife, his shield. He looked at me, his silent savior. And then Elroy smiled. It was a small smile, faint, but it was genuine. A smile of profound, sudden relief. It was the smile of a man who realized he was no longer a prisoner. "No," Elroy said. The word was quiet, but it was steel. It was final. Cornelius blinked. "What?" "I am not going anywhere with you," Elroy repeated. His voice gained strength, confidence, "and I am not your son." He looked straight into Cornelius's terrified eyes. "You said it yourself, Father. There is no blood. There is only a receipt." Cornelius staggered back. He grabbed the edge of the dining table for support. His face was twisted in disbelief. "You're betraying me." "Your own I am betraying a lie." Elroy cut him off. He stepped to Zadie. He placed his arm around her shoulders. He pulled her close. This was the first true gesture of affection I had ever seen him display in that house. "My family is here," Elroy announced. He spoke to the entire room. His head held high. "My family is Zadie. My family is Althea. And you, Cornelius, you are nothing to me. You are just a man who lived in my house." The rejection was absolute. It was the total annihilation of Cornelius's ego. He had lost the one person he desperately needed to validate his delusion. He became purely physical. He let out a wordless roar of frustrated violence. He lunged across the table toward Elroy, knocking over a centerpiece. I stepped forward. I raised my hand. I didn't need a sword. I had the truth. "Enough?" I commanded. My voice resonated with cold authority. "Your performance is concluded, Cornelius." Kay pointed toward the hallway, toward his coat. "You have two options," I said. "You will leave my house now, and you will never contact my children again. You will withdraw your candidacy from the council immediately. You will disappear from this city." Cornelius glared at me. His eyes were burning holes of pure hatred. "And if you don't, I answered, perfectly steady. "I will send copies of the medical files, the adoption papers, and the recording of you assaulting Zadie to the district attorney by morning. Fraud, psychological coercion, assault." I locked eyes with him. "You will not just be ruined. You will be indicted. You will go to prison, Cornelius. And the world will know the great Thorne patriarch spent his final years shuffling papers in a cell." The word prison worked like a physical restraint. He froze. His vanity could handle exposure, but his cowardice could not handle incarceration. He looked wildly at the faces surrounding him. They were fixed in looks of utter revulsion. He realized there was no escape. He turned toward the hallway. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't apologize. He simply grabbed his coat from the rack. He moved like a broken machine. "You'll regret this, you old witch." He spat over his shoulder. His voice was thick with venom. "You'll all come crawling back to me." He slammed the front door behind him. The sound rattled the crystal. It rattled the nerves, but it wasn't the sound of oppression. It was the sound of a cage door closing. A profound silence descended upon the dining room. It was thick but clean. Like the air after a great storm, Elroy collapsed back into his chair. He buried his face in his hands. His shoulders were shaking violently. He wasn't crying from pain. He was crying from release. He was finally free. Zadie rushed to him. She wrapped her arms around his trembling body. She didn't speak. She just held him. She was the one who was truly strong. I looked at my guests. They were my witnesses. Lucille Calloway was the first to move. She slowly picked up her dessert fork. She looked at the red wine stain, Then at the empty doorway, she looked at me. "Althea," she said. She lifted her glass of Bordeaux. "Pour me some wine, darling, and perhaps a new cup for yourself. To the Matriarch's will, the most honest dinner this city has ever hosted." The crystal clinked. The sound was pure and bright. The war was over. The door slammed. The crystals stopped rattling. The echo faded into the clean, exhausted silence of the apartment. The party was over. The guests left quietly, exchanging shocked nods. They hadn't come for celebration. They had come for justice. They left satisfied. I watched them go. Then I turned to Zadie and Elroy. Elroy was still weeping. Not in sorrow, but in relief. He was shedding 30 years of forced identity. He was free. Zadie held him. She stroked his hair. She wasn't just a wife. She was his true bloodline. The only family that mattered. We had won the battle. But the war leaves scars. The next 3 months were dedicated to healing. And to clean up first, we changed the locks. The final physical barrier against the past. Then the financial restructuring began. With Robert Henderson's discreet help and the evidence of fraud, we managed to negotiate the loans. The banks saw the proof. They saw the shell companies. They saw the coercion. They didn't wipe the debt clean. But they gave Zadie time and reduced the pressure. Elroy moved out. It was his decision. My only condition was that he had to learn to stand on his own. He rented a small studio apartment across town. He had to learn how to choose his own toothpaste, how to pay his own bills. He had to learn to live without a tyrant telling him who he was. He went to therapy. He learned to breathe without permission. He and Zadie started dating again. They went to the park. They held hands. They were strangers learning to fall in love for the first time, without the shadow. And Zadie painted. I came home one afternoon. The living room was bathed in bright, clear light. The windows were bare. The air smelled of turpentine and oil paint. Her easel stood exactly where Cornelius had made her kneel. On the canvas, cities were blooming. Bright, impossible colors. She wasn't painting her fear anymore. She was painting her freedom. I didn't stay in the city. The apartment, though clean, still felt too heavy, too full of ghosts. I moved back to the cabin. The old A-frame. My sanctuary. The silence there was different now. It was no longer the ringing emptiness of isolation. It was the quiet of profound, complete peace. The spring arrived. I spent my days in the garden. My archivist hands, used to the brittle texture of old paper, were now covered in rich black earth. I planted roses. I planted the peace variety, large, resilient blooms of yellow and pink. They say they are a sturdy, fighting flower. Like us, I was sitting on the porch one afternoon. The sun was warm. I was wrapped in a blanket, sipping tea from the fine china cup. The cup that had witnessed the war. Now it was my victor's cup. The mail carrier arrived. Old Mr. Fred. He brought the usual bills and one plain white envelope. No return address. The postmark was blurry. It was from the far north, a distant county seat, where winter lasts 6 months. I opened it slowly. I wasn't scared. Fear had evaporated. Inside, there was no letter. Just a clipping from a local newspaper. The Northern Herald. The blur was tiny. Tucked away in the municipal notes section, a poor quality photo showed the opening of a new DMV office. Cutting the ribbon was the local mayor. And to the side, in the background, stood a man. He was hunched over, wearing a cheap, baggy suit. He held a thin manila folder under his arm. It was Cornelius. His posture was gone. His commanding squint had vanished. He looked small, deflated, like a cheap balloon that had been pricked. The caption beneath the photo was clinical. It listed the staff present. Junior record specialist. He had fled to the edge of the world. Without Zadie's money, without Elroy's submission, without the power of his fake name, he became exactly who he truly was, a small man. Shuffling papers in a cold, distant office, I felt nothing, no malice, no pity, just a vast, cold indifference. He was no longer a person. He was a completed historical fact. I took out my matches. I struck the sulfur head. The flame was cheerful, bright. I held the fire to the corner of the newspaper clipping. The paper flared instantly. I watched the fire devour his image, devour the cheap suit, devour the look of tired, pathetic anonymity. The ash fell to the ground at the roots of my new roses. "It's good fertilizer," I said aloud. The wind picked up the black dust. It carried it away, dissolving the last physical trace of his tyranny into the air. I closed my eyes. I felt the spring sun on my face. I was no longer the gray mouse. I was no longer just the archivist. I was the keeper of my own peace. The gates of my fortress were open. I took a deep breath. It smelled of earth, of pine, and of freedom. The story was over. But the new life had just begun.